In 2014, Russian President Vladimir Putin seized control of the Crimean Peninsula. He dispatched a small army of heavily armed special forces soldiers to the region, who proceeded to blockade Ukrainian military bases and replace the regional government with a new group of pro-Putin puppets. It was dramatic, it was illegal, but it was effective. Ukraine and the wider world were caught off guard, and the operation was so swift that there was barely time for any sort of serious diplomatic or military response. For Putin, the mission was a smash success, a dream come true. Fast forward a little over 10 years, however, and that dream is beginning to turn into a nightmare. Making the most of their expanding arsenal and battlefield momentum, Ukrainian forces are actively targeting the peninsula more heavily than ever before. They're not trying to liberate it or retake it, but to isolate it instead, effectively making it increasingly costly and difficult for the enemy to occupy. To understand the impact of this strategy and the logic behind it, we have to rewind to March 2014. Putin's annexation of Crimea had gone off without a hitch. He'd managed to dismantle the region's parliament, install new leaders that were loyal to him, and even organize an entirely illegal and illegitimate referendum, in which a startling 96.77% of voters supposedly opted to leave Ukraine and join the Russian Federation. In the days that followed, Putin signed the Treaty on Extension of the Republic of Crimea to Russia, officializing the annexation. But Putin then faced a new problem, a problem linked to Crimea's unique geography. Since Crimea is a peninsula, it's not the easiest place to access. In 2014, the only way to get there by land from Russia was to cross the international border with Ukraine and travel through several Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, before entering Crimea from the north. The other options were to travel by air or sea, with ferries operating across the Kerch Strait, a relatively narrow waterway that links the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, with Crimea to the west and Russia's Krasnodar Krai to the east. Now, before the annexation, Crimea was entirely dependent on mainland Ukraine for its vital supplies of fuel, food, water, power, and civilian goods. After the annexation, it was up to Russia to deliver those same resources, but it wasn't very efficient to do this solely via ferry. Putin also wanted to encourage more and more Russian people to move to Crimea, buying up homes there, starting businesses, or taking vacations across the peninsula. To do all of that, he needed to make it easier to access. So he ordered the construction of the Kerch Bridge, also known as the Crimean Bridge. A veritable miracle of modern engineering, the 19 kilometers, 12 miles bridge began construction in February 2016 and opened to cars and other vehicles in 2018. The railroad component of the bridge opened a year later. Soon, tens of thousands of vehicles were crossing this bridge, the longest in Europe, each day dramatically improving Russia's ability to support the peninsula's logistics, transport troops and military equipment across the Kerch Strait, and facilitate the flow of tourism into the region. But history has proven that Putin is not the kind of man to simply settle. Driven solely by a relentless pursuit of power, he always wants more. So, in 2022, he gave the order for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, targeting the entirety of Ukraine, but 4 distinct regions in particular: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. There were several reasons behind the Russian president's decision, but one of his most important objectives was to secure control of the vast land corridor linking the Russian mainland with the Crimean Peninsula. By controlling Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, Russia would have a whole new way to reach the region, a crucial overland route for transporting troops and supplies, along with full control of the coastline surrounding the Sea of Azov. And so it came to pass. In the early stages of the war, Russian forces focused a large part of their efforts on paving a path to Crimea. They carried out a 3-month siege of the biggest city in their path, Mariupol, and as early as mid-May 2022, mere weeks into the invasion, the land corridor was largely cleared. Russia also leveraged its control of Crimea to funnel forces into Kherson from the south, facilitating the early capture of numerous small towns and settlements. The more land they captured, the bigger their buffer around the peninsula became, and the more impossible it seemed that Ukraine would ever regain control of Crimea again. It looked as though the region was lost forever, and the fact wasn't lost on Putin. In March 2024, at an event marking the 10th anniversary of the annexation, The president expressed his joy that the peninsula had returned to its home harbor, adding that the region, together with other occupied territories of Ukraine, will remain hand in hand with the rest of Russia for generations to come. At the time, even though Ukraine had been able to execute some strikes in and around Crimea, including several strikes on the Kerch Bridge, it appeared that Putin was right. Fast forward to the summer of 2026, however, and Russia's control of Crimea has declined significantly, thanks to a sustained Ukrainian campaign targeting the region's defenses, logistics, and supply lines. This campaign has arguably been running since 2022, with Ukraine carrying out sporadic attacks on targets like Crimean air bases, ports, and defenses whenever the opportunity arose. But it's really ramped up in terms of effectiveness and intensity in 2026. Kyiv's forces are now planning and executing relentless attacks on roads, bridges, infrastructure, and military installations that have triggered widespread power and water outages, severed supply lines, and plunged the entire peninsula into an unprecedented state of chaos, with panicked tourists and Russian residents lining up to flee the region. This all boils down to Ukraine's ability to learn from its mistakes, adjust its strategy, and adapt remarkably well to the changing conditions of the conflict. Back in 2023, for example, the country organized a massive counter-offensive, pushing back against the invading force with the intent of retaking land that's been lost to Russia, and more importantly, cutting through the land corridor to Crimea. Despite Ukraine's best efforts, however, and some moderate levels of success in certain regions, this all-important objective was not achieved. The Ukrainian forces simply couldn't contend with Russia's massive manpower and equipment advantages. The Kremlin's forces knew that their enemy was preparing to strike back, so established deep, dense defenses designed to help them maintain their stranglehold on the occupied regions. They set up minefields, they dug anti-vehicle ditches, and they stationed artillery crews in key locations, which allowed them to halt many of Ukraine's mechanized advances before they could reclaim large amounts of lost land. Due to its smaller army, Ukraine also had to divide its forces across different axes, which arguably made it easier for Russia to nullify the offensive. By the time the dust had settled, Ukraine had managed to recapture a small number of villages and settlements over a 6-month period, but it lost a lot of troops and equipment in the process. It had learned the hard way that a direct, full frontal assault into the land corridor was not going to work. The Russian defenses were simply too deep and dense to penetrate. But this is where Ukraine's tactical adaptability comes into play. Its commanders realized that they may not be able to go through those defenses, but they could go over them. They just needed the right tools for the job. It took time, but the country's defense sector rose to the challenge, developing bigger, better, and smarter drones, along with long-range missiles, slowly but surely bringing more Crimean targets into range. Ukraine also continued to pick off Russian assets across the region, like radars and air defenses, so that when the time finally came for a more intense aerial attack, Russia would struggle to defend itself. By 2026, the pieces were in place and the stage was set. Russia's forward momentum had slowed to a snail-like crawl. Ukraine's forces were successfully holding the line in the most important locations, and Kyiv finally had the assets it needed to, in the words of the country's own former defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov, turn Crimea into an island. But before we get into what happened next, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. In May 2026, Kyiv made its move. A rapid barrage of mid-range drone attacks began, targeting the likes of roads, rail transport, bridges, ferries, and air defenses, both within Crimea itself and the occupied territories that form the land corridor with Russia. In doing so, it severed the supply lines that had been feeding the region for so long. Its previous attacks on the Kerch Bridge had already made that structure a risky option for the Russian military to use, but the Kremlin was still able to funnel troops, fuel, food, and more into the peninsula via ferries and roads. These attacks have rendered all of those options null and void. Rail ferries crossing the Kerch Strait were disabled, one after another. Roads that had once been relatively safe for military convoys to travel along were suddenly controlled by Kyiv's drones. Nowhere was safe, no route was viable, the lines were cut, and the impact soon started to be felt across Crimea. Within days of Ukraine's campaign beginning, reports began to emerge of panic spreading across the peninsula as the flow of fuel and energy began to dry up. Then, Ukraine cranked things up another notch. Throughout June, it intensified its attacks and broaden its horizons to include additional targets such as electrical substations, fuel depots, logistics centers, and critical infrastructure, impacting not just Russia's military presence on the peninsula, but the many tourists, holiday makers, and homeowners in the region as well. In May, Ukraine carried out 22 confirmed strikes in Crimea. In one of the last weeks of June alone, the total number of attacks was 55. And these were some of the biggest and most devastating attacks the region has ever seen, as Ukraine wasn't just relying on drones, but even deployed its domestically produced Flamingo cruise missiles towards convoys operating across the land corridor and Russian naval ports on both the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. As a result, what began as a state of panic has turned into a region-wide state of emergency. Indeed, on June 26, the local Kremlin-installed Crimean authorities officially declared an indefinite state of emergency across the region. They've been left with no other choice but to temporarily close the Kerch Bridge, and numerous trains to Russian cities have also been cancelled due to the threat of drone and missile strikes. That's extremely bad news for the thousands of Russian people who are actively attempting to flee the region. Indeed, on June 26, the independent Russian Telegram channel Astra shared images and reports of an astonishing 15-kilometer, 9.3-mile line of traffic forming in the direction of the Kerch Strait Bridge as countless locals decided to evacuate the peninsula. The tourism sector too has taken a massive hit. Crimea has historically been a popular vacation spot for Russians, with many coming from far and wide to enjoy the region's beautiful beaches, coastal cities, fancy seaside resorts, and pleasant summer weather. The summer of 2026, however, certainly won't see the usual crowds flocking to this part of the world. Reports from Russian tour operators, hotels, and guesthouse owners all show the same trend. Bookings are down and cancellations are sky high. Indeed, one travel outlet said it had tracked a whopping 80% cancellation rate for June and 50% for July and August, with popular hotels that are usually bustling suffering record low occupancy rates. In short, Russian people are quite clearly realizing that Crimea is not a nice or safe place to be. Those that plan to go there are looking for alternative options, while those who are already there are doing everything in their power to get out. Some did this of their own accord after seeing just how bad the situation was becoming. Others, meanwhile, heeded the warnings issued by official figures like Fedorov, who warned of very unexpected consequences for the Russians and stated in no uncertain terms that hell is beginning in Crimea. Refat Chubarov, chairman of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, the highest executive representative body of Crimean Tatars, also urged Russian citizens in the occupied peninsula to get out while they can. In a video address shared on social media, Chubarov said that Ukraine's attacks on the peninsula are only going to become more intense from here on out. I want to address separately another part of the current population of Crimea, namely those who settled on the peninsula after the 27th of February 2014. Your presence in occupied Crimea with forged Russian property documents is illegal under both Ukrainian national law and international law. Now, as you can see for yourselves, Crimea has finally become a frontline area, and its liberation from Russian occupation forces is inevitable. Chubarov went on to say that anyone who wanted to avoid inevitable punishment should get out now or face the consequences. Every day that the Kerch Bridge remains operational is your chance to leave Crimea safely and voluntarily. Soon, there will be no such opportunity. Do not wait until the Kerch Bridge is demolished and the land corridor is finally cut off. Russian officials, meanwhile, can no longer conceal the scale of the crisis. In an astonishing and unprecedented move, the regional head, Sergei Aksyonov, made the call to restrict fuel sales to military vehicles, emergency services, and state agencies only. This was just the latest development in a fuel crisis that has gripped the region for several months. Earlier on in that crisis, Crimean car owners often had to travel across the Kerch Bridge to buy tanks of gas from Krasnodar Krai, with some even filling fuel cans and selling them back home for twice or three times the rate. That strategy is no longer viable, because after Ukraine struck the Krasnodar oil refinery on June 28, southern Russia plunged even deeper into its own fuel crisis. With gas in short supply, local fuel stations have started refusing service to any car with a Crimean license plate. This has led to arguments and even fights breaking out at the stations in question, with regional authorities forced to call in armed police in a desperate attempt to keep the peace. As a direct result, many people remain stuck in Crimea. They can't get the fuel they need to leave, and their lives are becoming more miserable by the day. Rolling electricity blackouts have been impacting the region since the June strikes, with countless homes and businesses losing power. Water and food shortages are also becoming more severe as the so-called Russian Riviera loses every last bit of its allure, turning from a holidays-maker's haven to a war-town battle zone. Air raid sirens ring out on a regular basis, followed by the increasingly familiar booms and bangs of explosion before fire and smoke fill the skies. Many Crimeans have taken to social media, sharing posts and videos detailing their distress, with some calling on Putin himself to take control of the situation. One young woman, for example, in a video posted on July 5th said, "I'm speaking to Moscow and to Putin on behalf of the people of Crimea. You promised us security and a normal life, but in reality there are empty gas stations, fear, checkpoints, long lines and total uncertainty. On television they say everything is under control, but if Crimea is in survival mode, then things are already no longer under control. Why have you abandoned us?" Those emotions are echoed throughout the region's population, but Moscow is failing to heed the call. Running out of roads and unable to rely on the Kerch Bridge, the Kremlin has tried to keep supplies moving to Crimea by sea with the aid of its Shadow Fleet tankers. That too ended in failure. On the night of July 6, 8 small tankers, each bearing 7,000 metric tons of gasoline, were sailing across the Sea of Azov towards Crimea when they were struck and destroyed by Ukrainian drones. A clear message from Kyiv that no route to the peninsula is safe. They're all being watched, with drones and missiles standing by, ready to fire on any viable targets that dare to make the journey. From day one of this operation, Ukraine's mission has been clear. As CNN journalist Nick Payton-Walsh puts it, the country intends to make Crimea hard to live in, a place without tourism, gas, power, affordable food, and the land bridge to it. As a result, what's already a tough place to live in seems less worth the cost for the Kremlin to hold on to. He goes on to note that Ukraine intends to turn Crimea from a jewel in Putin's crown to leverage for Ukraine, perhaps in any future peace talks, or even into a damaging thorn in Putin's side as he tries to navigate growing dissent about his war. So far, it's succeeding in all of those areas. When Putin took Crimea in 2014, he thought he captured an invaluable patch of land, a golden shining treasure he could show off to his people, a picturesque peninsula dotted with high-end resorts that Russians would enjoy and thank for him for decades to come. In 2026, that treasure has turned into a hellhole, a place of panic, fear and chaos, and the perfect symbol of Putin's disastrous decline. Now you can learn more about the fuel crisis impacting Crimea and Russia in this video, which explores how almost all of the country's regions are suffering from shortages, leading to rising anger from the public. Or check out this video for a detailed breakdown of the Kremlin's spiraling economic woes. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more breaking military news and insightful analysis just like this.